Iraq's second largest city, and it's ISIS's last main stronghold in Iraq. The liberation of Mosul will be both a symbolic and a strategic victory for the Iraqi government. In the summer of 2014, Mosul is where ISIS declared its so-called caliphate, the so-called Islamic State. The defeat of ISIS in Mosul will be the death knell of ISIS, the caliphate. However, ISIS in Iraq and indeed in the region and the world will remain a very dangerous, very powerful, very relevant terrorist organization. So they are not going to go away, but they will no longer have territory in Iraq, and subsequently that will also affect their ability to recruit fighters and also extort local populations. So they're going to take a very big hit in manpower, in prestige, and also in economic sustainability. The military campaign in Iraq is being led by the Iraqi federal government, but there are a diverse and wide variety of forces involved in the campaign, some of whom may not share the same agenda, and they have their own strategic interests. However, the main fighting force is the Iraqi army, backed by the elite counter-terrorism forces, and it's those forces who are expected to do most of the heavy lifting inside the city of Mosul itself, in terms of taking street by street and house to house fighting. But alongside them, we also have federal police, Iraqi federal police, who are playing a key role in taking some of the territory on the outskirts of the city. We have the Kurdish Peshmerga involved, particularly from the eastern front, who are playing a crucial role. And in fact, the coordination between the Kurdish Peshmerga and the Iraqi government is unprecedented. This is very good news for Iraq, and it's very good news for the coalition, and of course it's very bad news for ISIS. This is the first time we have Iraqi federal troops alongside Kurdish Peshmerga fighting the same enemy. So we have come a long way. In the reign of the former Prime Minister Maliki, we had a very tense situation between the Kurdish government and the central government in Baghdad, and in fact the two armies were facing each other and they had dug trenches. So this is very encouraging to see Kurdish Erbil Baghdad cooperation, and many hope this will continue. However, on top of the Iraqi forces and the Kurdish forces, we also have Turkish-backed paramilitaries who are being trained by the Turkish military, who are in Iraq, in Bakshiqa, near Mosul. We also have Iranian-backed paramilitary groups who are helping the Iraqi security forces take the territory south of Mosul. The Turkish military presence in Iraq is seen as illegal by the central government. They are a military presence whereby most Iraqis stand against them. In Baghdad, we have both Shia and Sunni politicians who are unequivocal about their presence, and they're seen as an illegal occupying force. However, for some of the local Sunni population, the Turkish military is seen as a check to Iranian ambitions. The good news is, so far, everybody has agreed to the Plan A. All the forces are very clear on how far they can go. So when we talk about the Mosul campaign, yes, we have Kurdish Peshmerga and Shia paramilitaries involved. However, they will not go inside the city itself. In the city itself, it will only be the Iraqi army, local Sunni tribal fighters. The problem is, whilst there is a Plan A which so far is going well, everybody has their own Plan B, and it only takes one group to make a unilateral move without the consent of others, and Plan A goes out of the window. It's very difficult to know how long the military campaign in Mosul will take. Much of this, of course, depends on how resilient ISIS are inside the city. We have to bear in mind, ISIS have had more than 2 years to prepare, and they've known for a while now that the Iraqi government, backed by the US-led coalition, is preparing for an assault into Mosul. They have dug tunnels inside the city. They have barricaded many of the streets inside Mosul. As they have done in Anbar and Salah ad-Din, they have planted hundreds, if not thousands, of IEDs, and it's going to make the campaign to liberate the city itself extremely difficult and extremely costly. However, we have had good news so far. The military campaign has been very successful, and in fact many of the villages outside Mosul to the south and to the east were taken very easily by the Iraqi army and the Kurdish Peshmerga, because the Iraqi government is receiving a lot of help from local civilians. They're receiving a lot of intelligence from inside ISIS-held territory, and this has helped the Iraqi military and the Kurdish Peshmerga. People estimate it will be 7 days to a week to 10 days before the Iraqi forces will be on the outskirts of the city of Mosul itself. However, the actual campaign inside Mosul could take several months. There is a corridor being opened deliberately by the Iraqi government, which would allow ISIS militants and fighters to leave Mosul towards the desert and across into Syria, and they are doing this to give another option to ISIS and to not inflict serious damage to the city of Mosul itself, and of course collateral damage if ISIS do not fight to the last man in Mosul. Many less civilians will die. The prospects for stability post-ISIS, Mosul and after the military campaign look very grim. Unfortunately, it's quite a bleak picture, particularly when we're talking about the political landscape. ECFR just concluded a successful visit to Iraq. We visited Najaf, Baghdad and Erbil. We've had a unique opportunity to talk to many of the key players who will be involved in the post-ISIS Mosul, and where everybody acknowledges there is a military plan that everybody has agreed to, there has been no political plan for post-ISIS Mosul, and of course much of this will depend on how costly and how difficult the campaign itself is. If Mosul is taken quite easily with minimal infrastructural damage and loss of life in Mosul, people would be more optimistic about the chances of stability. And of course much of this will depend on what the people of Mosul themselves want, and this is unclear. There are several competing projects and agendas over how governance would look like and how security provision would be in Mosul. I think everybody in Iraq, including the central government, recognizes there needs to be more decentralization. Locals need to have more power and more say over their own affairs. However, how that looks like is also an open question. Whether Mosul will be a separate region like the KRG, whether they would just remain as a province with more power devolved from Baghdad to empower the local provincial government, or whether it would have separate provinces within Mosul itself. And of course we also have to acknowledge Nainawa as a province is Iraq's most diverse province. We have a large Christian community, Yazidi community, we have Shebek, so minorities who will now want to protect themselves after ISIS to make sure another episode of ISIS will not be repeated. And of course these minorities suffered, everybody in Iraq has suffered from ISIS, but the minorities faced a particularly brutal genocidal campaign. They will now want to protect their own communities, and many are calling for semi-autonomous rule. They do not want their lives to be dictated neither by the Kurdistan regional government in Erbil nor by the central government in Baghdad.